Guys, we live in a very convenient world, and with power, we have light, we can cook. There are just so many conveniences that we enjoy just because of electricity. But all of us have experienced power outages, whether it's a thunderstorm in the summer or even a winter storm where there's snow and the power can be out a couple of weeks. But it's still fairly quickly that we know the power is going to come back on at some point. So what happens when the power goes out over a long-term period? And, guys, we've always talked about, grid down and EMPs, different things, that we have no power, and some of the things you can do. But what we're going to talk about today is a little different. I'm going to give you some mindset, because I think this helps us to prepare better than anything else, is to go through a scenario without power. And what are the ramifications? How is it going to affect you? First off, when we have power outages, and the first thing I think about is, I get to relax. If I'm sitting around the shop, the power shuts down, I just go take a nap. And honestly, it can be very relaxing. Power's out 2 or 3 hours, they get it back up. Let's say there was a car wreck up the street, which we've had that happen, and it hit a power pole and it knocked the power out for a little while. It's a very relaxing time. You may have a lot of work to do, but you can't do it, so you just sit back and relax. But one of the things over a long-term period is just sheer boredom. That is one thing that a lot of times we don't necessarily consider, and especially if you have kids. They're so used to being on social media or playing games and doing things that are electronic that they've even forgotten how to go outside and play. And I think that having some things set aside to relieve the boredom. One of the big things is card games, and that's a really easy one. Just having a couple of decks of cards, being able to play when you want, and it kind of brings the family together. But having other games as well, being able to play, and most families do have games that they can play, but having things to do and thinking it through. You know what, I'm out for right now, there's no power, so what can I do? And having some different projects to put together, things that need to be done. And honestly, in a grid down situation, you're going to be very busy, especially if it's a long-term situation. Now, another big one is climate control. I mean, guys, when it's hot in the summer, we turn up the air. When it's cold in the winter, we turn up the heat. And it's just a little flip of the switch. We can dial it up or dial it down. I mean, we can get our houses and the places we live very comfortable. And we live very comfortable. But what happens when you don't have power? I remember years ago, we had this massive snowstorm, and the power was only out for about 4 days. But the kids were young, and it got really cold in the house. We had a furnace at the time, but then we also had a small little propane wall ventless heater that we used to kind of keep the chill off if the power went out. But it still got cold. And so my wife was an RN, she was working during that time at the hospital, staying at the hospital. And they had big generators, so they were staying warm. But me and the kids were freezing. So we would get in the car and we would take off and just drive around and get to have the heat. But guys, honestly, in a cold environment or a winter situation, you could be without power and it could be life-threatening. A lot of times during the winter when they do have power outages, people die. And so having some preparations around being warm, staying warm if you have to. And, having a fireplace, having a generator to be able to keep the power going. There's a number of things you can do. But guys, consider what happens when the power is gone and it's really cold. When it's really hot, it's not as bad. I mean, it's not necessarily life-threatening. Yes, it's very uncomfortable. You feel like you just are in a sauna, but you can live through it. But when it comes to the cold, it's definitely something to be able to consider. And of course, there's a lot of different remedies, and we've talked about that in a number of videos. But the main thing is to think about if it drops down to freezing degrees and we don't have heat, what are we going to do? And you need to have some kind of backup plan or multiple plans. Now, light is a blessing, and it's just awesome to be able to flip a switch and you have light. Of course, we have all types of different lights, security lights, inside lights. But one thing you don't consider when the power really goes out, and it goes out in a large area, it gets really dark. Your neighborhood could be out of power, but the neighborhood beside you could have power. And it does illuminate. Those lights shine up and they just produce light in the area. But when the power goes out over a large area, it gets really dark. Now, moonlight definitely helps. And when it's very dark, you do realize moonlight and you can kind of see. But typically with no lights in the area, it's going to get very dark. And having some kind of flashlight, of course, one thing is just to go to bed early and just to enjoy having a different type sleep schedule. But it's definitely one thing to consider that when you flip that light on, there's no light. Now, obviously having lanterns or, flashlights, different things that will illuminate that you can recharge, but sooner or later, those batteries are going to go dead. And you're not necessarily going to be able to recharge unless you have solar power. And even if you do, it's going to be tough to make sure that those are sunny days when you're trying to charge whatever you're trying to charge. So having light, trying to figure out the best way at night to be able to deal with just not having light and not being able to see. Now, communications, that is something that is very important to your peace of mind, but also for security, different reasons, to know what's going on in your area. And two, having updates of when possible power may come back on, if ever. Your radios, they may not even work because the stations may be down. Your phones are definitely going to be out. And cell service with power out, you're just not going to have Wi-Fi and you're not going to have cell service. And being able to know what's going on around you. I mean, it's one of those things to consider ahead of time, because if you don't have power, you're not going to know anything that's going on around you. And so it's really important to consider, what do I do if I don't have any communication? I will give you a hint here, buying an emergency radio, one with a hand crank, solar panel, rechargeable batteries. You may have some power banks that you have built up that you can use at least for a time, or you can use them sparingly. But communications is going to be one of the most important losses when the power goes down. And if you have backup batteries for them, if you have a generator to generate power, to be able to know what's going on around you, that is going to be a very important part and a thing to really consider if the power goes down. You don't know where family members are, you don't know what kind of situation's going on, and guys, it can affect your emotional and mental health. No refrigeration or no freezer. And when you're out and you have all this stuff in your refrigerator and your freezer, it's going to go bad over time, and it won't take long. So really getting that stuff out and cooking it and going ahead and feeding yourself. One of the things to me that's really handy to have is a grill, a propane grill. Make sure you have extra propane tanks. But that's going to allow you to cook that food and to be able to get it prepared, that you're not going to lose it, even if you want to have a block party. But the problem is, everybody's going to have food like that, and there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to have to be thrown out. And so start to think about what would happen if the power goes out. Pulling out coolers or doing different things is only going to last you so long. But initially, you're going to have really a rich abundance of food. And so make sure when that time comes that you go ahead and eat the food that's in your refrigerator, then in your freezer, before you start opening and messing around with the food in your pantry, because it's going to last a lot longer. But having ways to cook it. Guys, if you don't have a propane grill, you may have a charcoal grill, or you may have something else, some small little camp stoves or something to be able to cook with, because that's also going to be a big problem, is cooking. Now we go over to our stove, turn it on, man, it's on, and you can heat up something, you can cook right there. But what happens if you don't have those things? Now, refrigeration. Your refrigerator, your freezer, without power, it's just a matter of time before that food goes bad. And so one thing I would recommend is to get to that food first and start preparing it immediately. Especially things like meat and different things that are very valuable as far as rich in food sources, vitamins, minerals, and all the good things that'll keep you healthy. The mustard and the mayonnaise, you can throw that out if you need to. But going ahead and cooking up the things that you have in there, eat your leftovers, then go to your freezer. Go to your refrigerator first, and one thing that I've always thought is just have a big block party. But the problem is everybody's refrigerator and freezer are going to be out. And so, there may be a lot of surplus food initially, but after time, that's going to run out and food's going to start going bad. And so before you hit your pantry, before you touch anything in your pantry, eat what's in your refrigerator, go to your freezer, and then you can go to the pantry or your long-term food storage. So you want to make sure that you do that in order. But when it comes to cooking the food, that is also an issue. If you don't have a stove that's working, obviously you need an alternative. You may have natural gas if you have a gas stove and you don't live in a state that's made that illegal, which is of course New York. But having a source to be able to cook. Now a lot of people have gas grills, including myself, and I have extra propane stored back. And after a while it will run out, but having extra will just give you more time. And the one thing about time is the more time you have, the more you can figure out what to do next. Little camp stoves and having, a fire pit with a grate over it and being able to cook just over a standard fire. Those are things that you need to consider ahead of time. If I don't have a refrigeration and if I don't have a stove, what are my backups? And so one thing about refrigeration sometimes you can take things and pack them in a cooler. But again, that is a very time-sensitive issue and it's going to go bad quickly as well. Even if you have a charcoal grill, make sure you have the charcoal set back. Make sure that you have propane set back. Make sure that you have wood stacked up. And that way you'll be able to cook over a longer period of time. Of course, obviously, if you're in an urban situation, your time's going to run out quicker. And when it comes to repairs, making sure you have tools. But the big problem is we become very dependent on cordless drills and saws and all kind of battery-powered tools. I will pick up a cordless drill in a heartbeat way before I'll pick up a screwdriver. And so without that, you're going to have to do things manually. And so it's just going to be tough, but you want to make sure that if you have a cordless drill that you haven't tossed out all your screwdrivers and other tools. And so the more manual tools that you have, the easier life's going to be. I try to buy vintage tools a lot of times that are hand cranked. I have a grinder that is absolutely fantastic. And you put it on your bench, bolt it on, and it just has a handle and you spin it. And man, the way the gears are set up, it gives you a lot of leverage and it gives you a lot of spinning that'll help you to sharpen knives or do other things that you might need to do. In a grid down situation, a lot of times repairs can be needed and they need to be taken care of immediately. And so just having some tools set aside is going to be very important. And again, not just power tools. Just normal conveniences like washing your clothes. If you don't have a washing machine, you don't have a dryer. How are you going to keep your clothes clean? And you can rinse them out, but after a while you need maybe a washboard. They make some really cool camping wash machines that are just hand pumps. And those are really cool as far as keeping your clothes clean in a grid down situation. But there are also a lot of other conveniences that we enjoy. And so think about those things that you just take for granted. But if they were gone, it would be really serious or just very important and again, inconvenient. And the power just makes it so easy. Without it, things get very difficult. Let's face it, guys, we live like kings. In fact, we live better than the kings of the Middle Ages. So we become soft and we need to make sure that we can handle it if things go south. Money, your finances. If there's a large power outage, the banks are not going to be able to function. Obviously, your cards won't work at any ATMs or any stores that you might be able to get to. And so you're going to have a big loss if they don't bring the power back. And you've got to have some backups. I'm huge about precious metals. Guys, I'm telling you, it is the one thing that you need to invest in because it's going to give you hard currency if things go south. Even cash for a while could really be useful because people will trade with it for a good while until they realize that there's no value to it. But having those precious metals, we've been trading in precious metals ever since they were invented, and people still, and nations still, back up their currency with hard assets. And so having some way to just put back, it's going to protect some of your wealth. Again, you go to the ATM, you don't have any cash, you put that card in, the power's out, you're going to have nothing. So make sure that you have a backup. Medical, if you're dependent on the modern medical system, your life could be in danger. And that's one thing, if the power is out for an extended period of time. Hospitals, yes, they run on generators. And so, you could possibly get some attention that you need if you can get there. But one of the problems is a lot of us have prescription drugs that we're very dependent on, things like that. And so just realize that if you have medical conditions or you begin to have medical conditions during a power outage, an extended power outage, that could be life-threatening. And so make sure that you do have the medical kits that you need, a lot of the supplies that you depend on. And some of the things, again, just that make life more comfortable. Imodium, Advil, Tylenol, all the different things like that. Things to treat poison ivy, poison oak. I mean, that can really be devastating. And so having those items set aside and put back, you can't always depend on the medical system. And so this gives you a way to at least take care of a lot of things. And last, but certainly not least, is transportation. Vehicles and an EMP could be inoperable. But with just a standard power outage, even if it's large, your car has gas in it, you can get around. The problem is you can't necessarily refuel, so that's going to be a limited source. So having your tanks full, making sure you keep them full, and then having extra gas cans really helps, and it keeps it very convenient if for some reason you need gasoline. But now as far as storing gasoline, that is a tough one because you've got to have certain protocol to be able to store a large amount of gasoline, or it could be very dangerous. The other problem is if we lose transportation, that means that trucks are not going to be able to resupply stores, and products, and that's going to be a big problem in the long term. So think about it, transportation goes out, what are you going to do? Obviously having some bicycles or an e-bike that you can charge for a while, different things like that, a scooter or even skateboards. That's going to be able to get you around faster. But those are some things to consider. If you don't have any mode of transportation, what are you going to do? Now guys, these are just 10 things to think about, and hopefully it'll help you to be better prepared. When you think the situations through, a lot of times you think about things that you don't normally think about when you're preparing. And so if there are other things that you can think about down in the comments, please leave it down there. I mean, that's a great way to be able to have a community, to be able to share ideas and to have different opinions about different things. Guys, you could have a power outage for 2 weeks, you could have a power outage for 3 months, and could really devastate your life. And so if you consider it that it could be an extended period, that's even going to be more detrimental to our nation, to you, and to your survival. So think these things through, make sure you prepare accordingly, and guys, it'll just make life a lot easier. It'll just give you an extended period of time. Be strong, be of good courage. God bless America, long live the Republic. Be strong, be of good courage. Be strong. But when you have no light, it gets super dark, especially at night. Okay, not especially at night, of course it gets dark at night. It can affect your motion. You have no outside input, no anything, okay. Input, output.